Good to have you on today, man. This is gonna be a fun one.
Yeah.
Why don't you give us a little background on yourself, right? We talk a lot about on this podcast of the athlete to entrepreneur journey and often how that comes full circle where you end up building back in sports anyway. I'd love to just touch on your journey a little bit and then we can start to hop into the cool stuff you're doing at Gametime and where you're taking it because you have huge ripples across the space and exciting. I think a lot of people get a lot out of this one.
No, I'm excited. Thanks for having me again. And from my background through sports and then into my now entrepreneurial journey. Growing up, I was a multi-sport athlete. So I played basketball, baseball, football, got kind of caught in the club warp that many people do of all of my weekends were just playing baseball tournaments or basketball tournaments in AAU.
And
And that
one,
was,
I just want to stop real quick. Do you think I always say this? I mean, obviously, I ended up playing D1 basketball. You play D1 football, but I go deep down. I go, I should have stuck with baseball because I think that would be the one I had the best chance to play pro. Like, do you ever think about that?
Oh, 100%. I was a way
Yeah,
better baseball player than I was a
same.
football player. But this is where, just the emotions of an athlete, what your friend group is like when you play these different sports. Or for me, I started playing travel baseball when I was 8 years old. So by the time I was 18, I was pretty much tapped out. And that was all baseball games in the summer and the fall. And that's where I started getting real football interest in my sophomore and junior year. And I got my largest, I think, baseball scholarship was 30% or 33%. And then when I got my first football scholarship and, in line with, I kind of have in my head a hierarchy of just different sports people would play, right? Like LeBron could play in the NFL probably. He probably could play other sports, but the NBA is kind of the cream of the crop. Kyler Murray could have played baseball. He's chosen football. So at every point, even athletes with multiple skills, they're finding their place and kind of what is the best opportunity that measures against kind of the risk rewards of being an athlete in that sport. And so I think we kind of see that naturally, but it'll be fun to see over time. We believe that there's going to be a lot of competition for sports. And so for me personally, I picked football just because that was what my passion was. And I had a different mindset. Like I was a really good right-handed pitcher. I had a really strong arm. I think naturally, if I were to look at my skill set, again, that's probably where I had the highest upside. But as I really started to take football serious, going from, just a big kid who could hit really well to now, okay, I get into college and how do I want to start, viewing my sporting career as a path to opportunities? I'm in college. I'm using this as an opportunity to get a scholarship. Lucky enough, I was able to get an undergrad and, for people, playing in college now, maximize it, get an MBA, get a couple masters, because that's again what sports is. You're using it to maximize the opportunities. So at UCF, went from being a defensive lineman, learning all of my skills in football, get off the ball, good push. Ended up making the move to center, where even though I started 5 6 games my redshirt freshman year as like a three tech defensive tackle, was able to have enough awareness. My roommate, my best bud is Blake Bortles. He was our quarterback, and so was able to tap into hey, how might I map as a center? Okay, well my athleticism puts me immediately in the top 1 percentile. I actually love the game. I love studying. That's going to give me another advantage where now I can use the intellectual side to get even more of a leg up. So once I saw through the position change, it just created a whole different, potential for what my career could have been. And so that was fun. We won the Fiesta Bowl back in 2014. And, I was on track to play at the next level. Like every athlete, I had three shoulder surgeries that ended my career. But like you said, getting into this transition from athletes playing to then getting into the world. My first exposure really on kind of the business entrepreneurial side was actually on the agency side. And this is from Blake, my best buddy who went from being an athlete that nobody ever knew about to being the number one drafted quarterback with every agency, everybody that was really, trying to understand where the evolution of quarterback play was going. Now, everybody's now trying to recruit this guy and understanding what are the incentive structures, and ended up building a lot of relationships kind of on the agency side, getting really into scouting, understanding my own kind of tools of how I developed my game. Then on the player evaluation side, after playing at UCF, I went right into recruiting. I actually ran the recruiting department at UCF, really kind of co-ran it. It was 0-12, so our staff got fired, and it was right before Coach Frost got hired on. But in that position, you get to see how are athletes even found? How are they discovered at these colleges across the country? And what you find is these are Excel spreadsheets. These are very static places of information. And so from my view as an athlete where, my best friend was now making 20 plus millions of dollars, you see the trajectory of where these salaries have gone, where the revenue has gone in sports. And from my lens, understanding both on the athlete side and then post athlete, you get to this understanding that all of the value that athletes have to me is essentially mispriced and misunderstood, where there needs to be much more of a revolution in understanding from an athlete's lens. Who are athletes? What are their skills? How can they become much more accessible broadly, not just having to be static information on a spreadsheet, but as sports continues to evolve, everything usually evolves and adapts around the athlete. And so that's how kind of going from my own sports journey, playing at UCF, then on the recruiting and the scouting side, those were kind of the kernels of thoughts to lead me to building in sports was how might we rethink the way that athletes are presenting themselves and how organizations are choosing and understanding who might be a good fit for my program and how are they going to develop over time.
Yeah, and this formed the basis of Gametime, obviously, and it's always cool to see like where the experiences lie of like playing to then scouting, and you find these gaps, and then you go attack it, and obviously it iterates and changes throughout. Give us a little bit of the evolution of Gametime then, as you saw it, you started building it. Where has that evolved from in the couple of years that you've been building on the founder side, and you have a co-founder as well? How that came together, I think that's important to the story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so going from my background where, at UCF, part of it for any sports organization is you're really presenting an opportunity back to athletes. Andrew, why did you go to BU, right? It was something about the opportunity, whether it was Boston or whether the academic side. What is that and how do you understand that? And so, where we really started, our interest was allowing organizations to more broadly represent who they were to athletes, what opportunities did they have the athletes, and what type of amenities. And, in the college space with my football background, we started with football. And this looked a lot like, what we call like virtual visits where, hey, my latest and greatest facilities, I have this video that may be out there on social media. How do we use this to really understand what athletes are interested in this content? And then also, how do we start to build a relationship? And so, I have my sports background. My co-founder, Alex Rudloff, he is from the technology world. And so we met, kind of post my playing career, but Alex was a technology and a product founder. He built a company, Emerse, helping students basically take smart resumes and match them with different positions post their college career. So this idea of discovery and placement within the job space, he has that background. And then he sold a company to AOL. After AOL, he was the chief digital strategist at TEDx. So this idea of taking an in-person event and how do you intersect this idea of decentralized media and content. And TED Talks, and TED is one of the largest, if not the largest, global media property. And a lot of those insights were driven by him from this, discovery centric of how do these stories connect people to bigger ideas, to bigger opportunities, and then the infrastructure. And so a lot of that, as we started to intersect that with colleges, we went from kind of colleges up to the Olympic market, where national governing bodies and national governing organizations, they're trying to also understand what makes a great athlete. And then outside of the, just the solidified infrastructure of a single sport world that athletes are living in, how do we even understand or know how we reach or how we educate athletes that might not just be in our backyard or be behind us? And so, from both our mindset and how we worked originally with sports organizations, and then through the unique skill sets that my co-founder and myself, we started broadening much past college to the Olympics. And so there's a web platform that organizations are using really to discover, find, and engage with athletes, as well as they're collecting information from the athlete. Who are they? What is about them that makes them a great athlete? And they're starting that relationship. And then for the athletes, they're using a mobile app where intentionally they're engaging and they're communicating with these organizations. And they're, basically posting their resume of how they're developing, how they're changing over time to get opportunities within our platform. So some people in the industry liken it to kind of like a LinkedIn for sports. But if you think about that around the specific athletic video and metrics that go into getting opportunities, you're definitely on the right path. And that's how we've kind of gotten there and where we're at now.
Super cool. And just side note, before we go in a rabbit hole on this, at BU, at Boston U, they made us, it wasn't affiliated with TEDx, but they made us like give TED Talks like as our final presentation or whatever. So I have a pretty good one out there. I'm sure that video is surfacing somewhere on the web. You just reminded me. I did like on why tipping culture is stupid. But anyway, side
Hot
note.
take. Hot take. All the baristas out there and all of the service worker men and women
well, you just
don't listen.
They don't have it anywhere else in the world. But anyway, I don't remember a ton of it, but it was pretty fascinating. But super cool. So, and the reason I bring that up is, so you have this sports background, sort of the opportunity and vision. Your co-founder has this tech background and understands that side. How do you see that, like for other people, or as even you're growing, like finding missing pieces to the puzzle, right? It takes an army to build these things. I'm curious, like the thought process of how you guys came together, how other people or founders should be thinking about finding those missing links to their business.
Yeah, well, I think looking broadly at, the world today, technology is like this hot button word. It has been for 20 years now. And technology under the lens of really democratizing access or really changing how the world interacts. And I think, looking at sports, this is one of the areas where technology can really do that. Right now, each sport is essentially its whole world where it's just completely fragmented. And so, for us, we knew that there had to be technology at the core. And so for my background, wasn't a core competency. For him, he knew about sports, was a fan of using technology to really disrupt industry, connect the world like he did with, kind of the TED Media platform. But how does all of that come together? And I think it's just kind of getting back to the fundamentals of, again, how opportunities are, facilitated in different industries. For sports specifically, there is this opportunity. And, as you build people over time, understanding, where these skill sets fall in and how to overlap and intersect, really it has to be a distinct problem that you're solving. And so for us, the big constraint in sports is for most coaches and scouts, they're having to pay money to go in person to different areas, to go out of budget. And so how can you really find people who, are willing to do what it takes to find other ways and methods, test that very quickly, and then understand what is the broader market, saying. And I think for us, we're also lucky because everything that I've, kind of been understanding or seeing around how things are going to shift to the athletes, how athletes' skills are really important to how they succeed. The market is almost starting to, mirror back some of these sentiments versus the opposite where it's going away. So I think there is an element where you have to constantly be pressure testing these insights with the world. What is the market? What is the world telling you? And continuing to adjust. But ideally, you're kind of skating to where the puck is going, sort of say, so that you're not always having to reinvent kind of new things and seeing these wide gaps, but you're shortening the gaps and you're kind of plug and playing as you're building that momentum.
Yeah. And something you guys have done is, so you have the digital tech side, and then you also do some in-person activations. And we've seen even this shift, especially post 2020, of like people wanting some more of that in-person as well, just because everything became so isolated and tech focused. How are you balancing that? I know you run some camps, you do some in-person around the digital. What does that look like? And how do you view that as this opportunity that you're taking advantage of and piecing them together as a good balance of digital and in-person, a part of the Gametime ecosystem?
Yeah, and I think you alluded to the date where things started to shift rapidly. And so we created some of these digital combines for Olympic teams, for professional organizations, for colleges as a way to help supplement, hey, now that the world actually can't connect in person, how can we still not lose everything? How can we pick back up and actually build momentum, which, we were able to do in a big way. But to your point about, hey, where do events fit in? Now for the last 4 years, we've built a platform for any athlete without having to show up at an in-person event or to stand in a line of 100 or 200 guys to shoot a couple 3-pointers or to run a couple drills just to get 5 to 10 reps. You're having, so many constraints around your ability to perform. We've solved that over the last 4 years with the ability through our platform to collect the metrics, collect the video to be able to, essentially check that credibility. Now we understand that ultimately sports happens in person. And where we really want to focus our in-person efforts is the speed of the real-time data and video capture. So we just ran our first event at UCF called the Search for Greatness. For those listening at home, think of this as the America's Got Talent for Sports, where we're working with, again, diverse professional organizations to recruit this talent. But at these events, as athletes are performing a 40-yard dash or a 5-10-5, or even customize around maybe a cycling watt drill, now GMTM, we also have hardware at these events where an athlete can walk up, instead of having to wait in a line of 100 athletes, they're able to check into a station. They know this athlete is coming up. Now they're up. The athlete is up. They're getting measured. They're going to be recorded at the same time. And boom, that athlete is going to get in real time the video of them shooting those threes. What was your percentage? What was your accuracy? That's known by an athlete. But also on the other end, there's people watching and evaluating these events. So how can the 5 or the 10 or the 20 scouts immediately in real time see this information? And so we want to take essentially what we've built over the 4 years, which is this ability to scale. How might we be able to see every flag football athlete in the country? Okay, great. Now we know in-person events is going to be a part of every athlete's journey. How do we also tighten the loop between athletes coming to these events broadly, capturing this information where it can live in the same place in perpetuity and be built on over time?
Definitely needed. And something else you've done cool off the bridge of this is you actually have a contract on the military side, which is now gone. And we always talk about sports as a wedge. Tell us a little bit more about that and how that developed and even where you see that going, of sports being this great, call it playground, but to larger and other unique areas or industries.
No, absolutely. And, our mission is connecting athletes to opportunities. And that's very purposely stated in that way because, as an athlete, your journey is developing. That's the name of the game, is developing. And you don't know exactly what your exit path is. It could be the professional league. It could be in college like us. And at every given point, you're offloading from sports into a secondary market. What is your value in that secondary market? And we want to, again, be a place for an athlete that isn't just going to be the one athlete making tens of millions, but in high school, in college, as you're developing yourself and transforming yourself, working on these skills, turning into an elite athlete, we want you to see all of the diverse opportunities that come from that. And there are organizations who are looking explicitly for athletes. And so when we think about even the Fortune 500 for female executives, over 90% of female executives are former collegiate athletes. And so you brought up kind of the military, defense recruiting for our country is absolutely broken, partly because it's done in a lot of the same ways that sports recruiting is done, where recruiters have to go to a gym or they have to go in person or they're holding events. And in the same way, for an athlete that might not make the Olympic team, maybe they don't make a college team, they can still get a job. And 100% job placement from something like the Air Force Academy creates a higher secondary market value. And these are aligned developing traits that athletes are already building: teamwork, communication, and on the physical side to be ready.
I love the secondary marketplace concept. Like I can actually visualize that now. Of it'd be really cool. I don't know if any of the listeners or anyone has sort of a creative. I mean, I could go on Canva and make some shitty version of it, but it is cool. Like if you think about it, if you could see how many people drop off from middle school to where, high school to where, to college where, pro where. And it is like you are, like they always say, your cleats or your shoes, like you're going to hang them up at some point. And that is interesting of how you're viewing it from, okay, yeah, maybe this opportunity is to go pro and that sort of becomes your thing. But for the vast majority, it's not. And how do we make sure you're getting to the next level? And that makes a ton of sense. And now I think it's a good segue, Joey, to this NIL now, right? And it was different than when we played. It wasn't really around. And I mean, under the table, right? I mean, it's always been around, but from the standpoint of from a mass appeal, you can see Caitlin Clark on a State Farm commercial while in college. What do you see this impact as? Where do you see name, image, and likeness, NIL, the direct impact, but also some of the lag effects or the secondary effects that it's going to have downstream and even to what you're doing at GMTM or Gametime?
Yeah, so to me, I think the result of what name, image, and like at a surface level, I think most people think of NIL as literally just influencer marketing. And I would say to all of those people, let's start to redefine what this term of name, image, and likeness is, and then how it's actually changing things. And to me, the biggest way is that recruiting in the United States is no longer free. Where before NIL, basically every college, every team was doing free recruiting, meaning that it was actually illegal for them to come out of pocket to pay players to come to their school. Now, what NIL has actually done is it has smashed this fake kind of world of free recruiting, and it has intersected real value with what it takes to get a talented athlete onto your team. And so I know name, image, and likeness, it could just be, hey, here's a sponsor for this drink. But what it actually is it's money for talent, period. And so I think in the short term, what we've seen over the last year or two is, the college fans and for the fan watching at home, there's so much confusion because every team, every organization is dealing with this completely differently of how they're recruiting, of how they're disrupted. And so ultimately, I think all of sports is going to have to continue over time to compete in recruiting top talent. Every athlete that's going to get signed is going to have some sort of dollar amount associated, and it's turning everybody into recruiters. So now a brand can be involved with an athlete when they're 14 or 15 and may be the next thing. Well, guess what? These brands or sponsors also have to recruit, just like a college might need to recruit, just like a professional league might need to recruit. And so what we say internally is that it has turned everybody into a recruiter. That is what name, image, and likeness has done. Everybody is turned into a recruiter. And at every point, an athlete's value can be transacted. What is the value that they're at in any given time? That's going to look different for an athlete. Patrick Mahomes was worth differently if you wanted to interact with him when he was just a freshman at Texas Tech and nobody knew who he was. It was very different at the end of his time at Texas Tech. It was very different his third year in the NFL. It's way different now, right? But at each position, that athlete has had a different market value and incentive to, what brands that might align with him and where he's at in his developmental journey. Where we believe the future will be these athletes, organizations, and brands and sponsors creating much more holistic and organic activations around true development. And so that's kind of the hope that is the good version of the future that we believe in is, hey, it's not a bad thing that athletes are getting money. Let's just not make it transactional. How can it align with an athlete's unique story? What about them makes them interesting from an athlete perspective as they develop, and who might be good people to work with so that the rising tide kind of lifts all boats rather than things become too much zero sum, over promise, under deliver, and now what we're seeing is literal litigation.
Yeah, and it's all going further and further downstream. I know there's been some crazy headlines. I saw the one day it was like a golfer, like a 5-year-old golfer. So it's nuts, but it's cool. So anyway, as you think about the next 5 years of Gametime and all these different factors we've talked about and where you're at, and you got some military stuff, you got in person, you got tech, you're creating these opportunities throughout. Everyone's becoming a recruiter. What's next? Where are you going? What's the main objectives, and ultimately, where is the ultimate vision line? Where do you see it in, as we hit, we'll just call it 2025, 2030?
Yeah, I think it's really shifting from just an opportunity marketplace of athletes, using GMTM to upload videos and metrics to almost apply for jobs, to becoming more of that everyday developmental hub and solution for both organizations and for the athletes. So how can we go from, in an athlete's mind, hey, I want to make the U.S. national team in flag football. Let me make sure I upload my latest 5-10-5 or my highlights, to, no, I actually want to be the best flag football player. So because of that, here are the workouts I'm doing every day. I'm continuing to upload that information. All of my coaches are seeing that. But over the long term, we're much more entrenched in this idea of consistent daily, weekly development for an athlete, as we believe that'll be kind of the longer term recruiting. Right now, recruiting's done in kind of like a snapshot of almost like a balance sheet, right? Where it's, hey, on this given day, I do a combine. Here are my stats. Here's kind of, the assets, liabilities, whatever. But it's just a single point in time. And over 6 months, over a year, that might be outdated. Maybe I'm increasing my vertical jump an inch every 3 months. Things like that really matter. So how do we, help shift from, more 6 month to a year snapshots of where an athlete's at to more consistent and compounding ability to interact within the platform and with each other. So this year is going to look about, taking all of these relationships and scaling that across the country and scaling that to the athletes themselves. So athletes have an understanding, what does GMTM mean to themselves, to their, in their ability to develop as an athlete every day.
Yeah, and last thing on that, you just sparked a thought. As we have obviously World Cup coming in 2026, we have the Olympics, Summer Olympics in LA in 2028, Winter Olympics 2034. Anything around that in the development, especially as the Olympic side, potentially we talk about name, image, and likeness, but that could get completely reshaped, and that whole structure could get completely different, even over the next few years.
No, 100%. And I think everything, big picture tracking towards 2028 in LA, in the US, I think so much is going to change around, how we're helping in the Olympics, them recruit new athletes, and how we can see, a flourishing of these unique stories, over the next 3 years leading up to the games, with the change in how we're seeing media. Now we're reading about Netflix and kind of the athlete, the direct media with athletes kind of narrative. Those are the areas that we're going to be doubling and tripling down on as we understand who these athletes are, as they get introduced to organizations like the Olympics and the brands. We want to be that kind of profile of record that can really help drive, here's how they've developed. And, that's where, from our background, we've had athletes that have gone from never being seen before to literally on the Olympic stage. And so how, through the progression of how they got from point A, ultimately on that stage, how can that kind of be galvanized, and how can the story be told at scale for all of these athletes thinking towards 2028. So it's going to be a game-changing cycle for the Olympics. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, it definitely is. Now, where can people learn more? What's website, socials? Where can people start to engage more with everything you got going on?
Yeah, so gmtm.com is the website. And then to see some of our latest information, GMTM Sports on IG, on TikTok. We're posting a lot of the recap of the events that we've done and a lot of the new innovative technology that we're bringing to the market. So check us out there.
Love it. Appreciate you coming on, Joey. It's a fun one, and the future of sports is looking really cool, especially as Discovery gets transformed.
No, I appreciate it, Andrew. Always a pleasure, and good talking to you.